And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to season 5, the very first episode. It's episode 203 of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We're here with John from Loud and Proud Orlando. Did I get that right?
Yep, loud and proud Orlando. That's
Loud and Proud
correct.
Orlando. And we are here recording our first not so deep dive of 2024. Starting off with Orlando City. John, how are you? Thanks for being here as the first guest of our rebranded podcast.
Great to have be on, guys. It's good to meet you, and it's funny because we just rebranded our podcast as well. So I know what you guys are going through, and 2024 seems like a new year for a lot of people trying to do things a little bigger and better and differently. So excited to see what you guys have in store for us.
Yeah, and you as well. We're super hyped to have you on because we've done deep dives, we've done not so deep dives, but it's always nice to have a point of view from somebody who knows the team inside and out just a little bit better than us. So really excited to have you on, and happy to have you as a part of Scarf of the Week, our favorite segment that we do every week, 203 weeks in a row now. I see you've got one on the wall. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when you mentioned this, I was thinking about going to dig one out because I've got quite a few old scarves. I used to actually work for the club. I used to run the merchandise department.
Oh,
So
wow.
there I got quite a few relationships, especially with a big company called Roughneck Scarves. You may know them. They probably made the one you're wearing right now. They're a big provider for MLS. So went deep into the scarf world at one point. So I've got some obscure ones, but yeah, I thought the best one for you guys to see was just the one that's already up on my wall, the Open Cup 2022 champions, which earlier in the year when we had that crazy news about the Open Cup going on, was very symbolic for me to be podcasting with the a scarf on the wall for a competition that is that historical and meant that much to our club. It was an incredible day. It was not easy for us, as I'm sure you know, since we joined the MLS. We had an historic USL history and won a lot. So this was our first trophy as an MLS team, and it means a lot to us.
Wonderful. Yeah, the it's great that they're back in. It's great that MLS hasn't let them leave, or US soccer hasn't let them leave. So excited that that's still going to continue on. Below me on my screen, Connor's here, and Connor's going to tell me all about his scarf because he hasn't said a word yet because I keep talking. Connor, how are you, buddy?
Well, you'll be happy to know that my first words are going to be that at least two of us on this screen right now have their team has won a U.S. Open Cup. I'm sure you could figure out who the one person that has not won it is. Uh, but yes, happy to be back. Thanks for hopping on with us. I brought out my one and only Orlando scarf, and will only be my one and only Orlando scarf. We didn't mention this before the podcast, but I promise you I will be completely unbiased, but I am an Atlanta United fan. So there is a little bit of hatred in my heart for Orlando. It's all good fun though. No like actual hatred towards any Orlando or Orlando fans, but this was a really great scarf and it was a really good deal. It is made by Roughneck Scarves. I did check the tag. Um, and I do like to break this one out when I get the opportunity because I do, as much as it pains me to say it, I do like the scarf.
I remember when we designed that scarf and sold that scarf. So there you go. I remember it was part of the Hunt series with the eyes. It was really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool, honestly.
Yeah, mine looks like it's Fanatics. I don't know if there's a link between Fanatics
Fake
and
fan.
Roughnecks, but uh, I'm the odd guy out here, it seems. But yep, this one I've actually got two of these. Funny enough, the other one's sitting over there in the corner because I bought this, and my brother got it for me for Christmas. So I bought myself a Christmas gift. My brother got me a Christmas gift, um, and they were the same gift. So I've got two of these. We tried giving one away last year, but the person didn't take it. So we did a little uh, kind of like giveaway and pick the person, and they were like, "Oh, when are you going to be at the game?" I'm like, we're in New York, man. We can't do that. We can send it to you. Like, oh, I don't want to give out my address or whatever. I'm like, okay, that's fair. We'll hold on to it for maybe another time. We'll do our best. But scarf for the week done and dusted. Very excited to now jump into a not so deep dive, but maybe deeper than previous deep dives. Deep dive. Orlando City enters with Oscar Pereira with a new contract in hand, leading Orlando for the fifth consecutive season since taking over in 2020. Last season, they finished second in the East, second overall with 63 points on an 18 wins, 7 loss, 9 draws record. They did end up losing to Columbus in the semis, who did go on to win MLS Cup. But we're right on the back of some really big news where Duncan McGuire finalizes a deal to Blackburn in one of the craziest transfer sagas in recent memories. Kind of want to get just from you, John, your instant reaction here of as it was going down, maybe like story by story, right? First he's over there, then it's over, then oh my gosh, it's back on. Now the deal is double worth of what it was, and it's a loan with a buy. How did it go down over there in Orlando?
I mean, it was pure chaos, I think, is the is the general feeling from Orlando fans of the past like 48 hours. Just insanity. First of all, there was rumors of them being interested in him earlier on in the season for a loan, and we rejected that. We rejected a few offers from European clubs earlier in the window, and it just kind of seemed like Duncan, had interest, but we weren't going to entertain them. And then sort of the end of the window came, and it was a lot more. We were hearing reports that Duncan was interested and wanted to go. We'd offered him a contract. He wasn't going to take a new contract with us. And so we were going to basically, help the player and find the best scenario for him. There was a deal on the table from Blackburn that Tom reported, I believe, that was 2.9 million. And that was sort of rejected. Sheffield Wednesday were in there. Then it was reported by Tom that there was a 4.5 million deal with an add-on of 2.5 million, and that Duncan was on the plane and that this had been agreed to. So he was leaving. We were having camp in Mexico. He'd flown from Mexico to the UK. While he was on the plane, Blackburn then pulled out of the deal, saying that it had collapsed, saying they didn't have the money. So then at this point, Duncan is, scrambling with his agent. Our GM Luis is trying to find him a new deal, going back to Sheffield Wednesday, seeing if they can give us, the same deal that we had been promised by Blackburn. Then the next day, Blackburn come back in and say, actually, we can do it. But now we're looking at a whole different deal. So it changed from being a purchase option to being a loan deal. And that's what eventually we saw go through was Tom Berger reported it was a $700K loan deal with potentially a sale of 7.5 million with add-ons of 2.5 million in the future. So if that goes through, it'll be another big export for us to the UK. But for right now, Duncan there, 6 months, loan for the rest of the season, help Blackburn try and not get relegated, although it's not looking great for them. So, but we get 700K out of it that we can use on our budget this year. And obviously now we need to go out and replace a striker that I don't think we were planning on losing.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my next question for you goes into is if we're talking about the roster and what you think you need to replace, obviously now you're looking at a massive hole with maybe a Duncan McGuire sized hole. What do you think maybe that is it, or if there are other places they still need to attack with the transfer window being open as long as it is?
Sorry, there's really two big holes for us, one being a center back and the other being striker. Center back, it is rumored and has been confirmed by Tom Berger that we are going to get our man as a guy out of Norway called David Brekalo, who looks like a killer of a center back. So if that happens, then we're sorted there. But definitely striker now, obviously with Duncan going, is the big question mark for us. Depth-wise, we have Enrique, who he's a bit more of a smaller 9, more of like a false 9, not sort of your typical big number 9 forward. So we also have Jack Lynn, who was the MLS Next Pro MVP and scored the most goals there last year. So a lot of people hoping that he can make a jump up. But really the feeling around the Orlando City fans is that we need a experienced number 9, maybe a DP, maybe not. Somebody can come in and bag us goals, which was one of our biggest problems last year, just not finding the net enough, not being clinical enough.
Yeah. Connor, do you have thoughts on that roster build at all, if they have any other holes that weren't mentioned already?
Yeah, I was on the exact same train of thought. Originally, I picked center back as the biggest hole, and then I saw the Brekalo deal go through, and then I think that kind of solved that issue. And then now that the Duncan McGuire move has gone through, striker was the position that I picked as well, as probably needing somebody to come in. I mean, I think Orlando's in too good of a position right now to kind of just like play the guessing game on who's going to work at striker. I feel like they definitely need someone who's going to come in and be proven, because this team is good enough to challenge for Supporter Shield. And I just feel like kind of taking a gamble at striker is a huge risk for a team that should be challenging for the top finish in MLS. So I mean, I think to your point, there's probably like some decent potential at the striker spot. I mean, Enrique didn't get too many minutes last season. Um, and Jack Lynn, like you said, showed really good potential in MLS Next Pro. But I think it would probably be best for a Supporter Shield push that they get someone either that's been proven successful in the league, or just somebody who's like maybe proven it on a different stage, but one that's maybe comparable level to MLS.
I just want to, just for my notes, I did hear you say that Supporter Shield was the top of MLS. Is that right? You're telling me that that's more
Well,
important
that's
than
that's
MLS
kind of
Cup?
how it. That's not
Yeah,
what I said.
that's
But
what I'm
you
taking
do
from
kind of
this.
need to finish in first in order to win the Supporter Shield.
I'm just trying to make sure that I take from this that you are a Supporter Shield truther
You
like myself.
No, you
Oh,
you like to just hear whatever you want to hear, right?
Well,
uh,
there's only one improvement we can make on that front, right? There's only one position we can go up there. Second overall was a hell of an achievement. I'd love first overall.
that's right. Yeah, and you guys are right at the cusp of it, right? So, um, for me, I also agree. Right, right. The striker hole is big. I think Enrique and Lynn are a decent combo. I don't think, especially if you're going to transition maybe to playing with one, I don't think it's a bad setup. One of the other things that I was looking at was maybe some midfield depth, like in the 8-10 role, maybe a little bit more advanced because you've got Ladero coming in, which I'm really excited about. Um, and then Thor Hallison, first of all, great name, Dagger Dan Thor Hallison, awesome. We're putting together an all names team 11 in MLS, and he's in there, easy. But then everybody else in that midfield group is relatively defensive minded. Sit in, destroy, pick up, and distribute. So it'd be interesting to see if they can pick up somebody, not necessarily at like a DP or an instant starter, but just a rotation piece. I mean, you guys are going to be in a ton of games this year. That'd be a position of interest for me if I'm looking at this. I also left off center back because I saw Bracalo get pretty much confirmed, and that actually moves me to my next point of best addition, and I'll just kind of continue on here because I love this signing. Looking at him and watching some clips and looking at his stats is uh, almost like for like of Antonio Carlos, right? Such a big piece of the team. Letting him go, it was just to the player, right? He deserved to move on where he wanted to go. He's given what he needed to give. Um, but being able to bring somebody in who's a very similar play style and should relatively transition well, I don't think there's going to be a huge gap in terms of adjustment or play style. And I think it's a plug and play. And I really, really like they went out and did that instead of, you know, oh, we'll wait for the money to come in and we'll try and kind of drag their feet, which you see a lot of teams do. They saw the hole, they filled the hole, and I loved it. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, John, where other best additions might come in.
Yeah, I totally agree on Bercalo. I think that's for me that's like a DP center back, but not a DP center back, if that makes sense. Like he is the level of player that I believe will be up there in the conversation to be one of the best center backs in the league at the end of the season, and that's just going off what I've seen, based on the fact that he's got incredible movement in the box. Just he looks like you're all around modern day center back who can do everything. Like he can score, he can pass, he can defend, he can run, he can jump, he can do it all. So I'm excited for that one. And we're spending like real money on him. Like we've never spent like 2.5 million is what it's supposed to be. Antonio Carlos was 1 million. So it shows that we're really investing in that defense. And that was one of our biggest assets last year, like always has been under the Oscar system. Like we're hard to break down. So I think him and Janssen will be potentially one of the best center back partnerships in the year if Janssen's able to keep his, form up that we saw from last year. So that's a massive addition. Nico Ladero as well. Like you mentioned it. I think we have some concerns about his age and how much he can do, but they put him in against Flamengo in the preseason friendly, and we really clicked, like better than with Mauricio in there. Even in one game, you could see the difference. Like Nico does stuff that Mauricio was not doing for us, and in the way we play, that number 10 is so crucial. I do agree that there are some questions around depth. We've had a lot of debate around, is Facu going to play there at times? Is Martin Ojeda going to play there at times? Like we have a wingers who can play the 10 as well, but I think none of them as well as Nico will. So I think we're going to play Nico as much as we can and have to fill in when he's not there. And just a quick thing on Dagger Dan, like he is absolutely one of my favorite players. I love the guy. Everyone calls me the Dagger Dan fanboy because I literally I'm obsessed with him. But people seem to forget that he is a D mid. Like we turned him into a right back, but he's played all over the park, so he can fill in. You know, we've seen him play at the attacking mid role as well. So, you know, I expect him to have another big season and be the kind of floating player that we can move around and fill in positions where we need him.
Love it. Yeah. That's always nice to have those sorts of plug and play guys because it makes roster build so much easier. Connor, do you have thoughts
You
on
know who
who their
loves those
biggest?
types of players?
Oh, cool. Who loves those types of players?
Benny Ball. Benny Ball loves those types of players. Sorry, I got ahead of myself.
I would say
That's
I was
later
trying to
today.
lead you in there, and this is that off season rust we're trying to shake off, right?
I couldn't help myself.
Love
I'm
it.
cheating a little bit on my best edition because technically he was there last year, but I've gone for Cartagena. He came back, I think, fully now, so
Yeah, we
I'm
did sign
counting.
him, so it counts.
Yeah, so I'm counting. He's not like a new addition from last season because he was here last year, but I think his role in the team, he plays it really well. Exactly as Andrew mentioned before. It's like destroy and lay off. And I think him and Arujo could create like an amazing midfield partnership there, and really help to defend that back line, be that first line of defense before it hits the back line. So I think he fully deserved to get that move back full time. I think it's great that Orlando went committed to bringing him back. And like I said, I think him and Arujo are poised to create like a really deadly midfield there this year.
So additions are great, but they usually come at the cost of other players. I was curious, John, from your point of view, who's the biggest loss out of your group so far? I think there are some obvious ones, but are there some others there that might qualify?
I mean, I think with Mauricio and Antonio, like you mentioned it, we were very much ready to let them go. Mauricio had really slowed down. It was not performing the way he was. Antonio had injuries. Like Schlegel played a lot of games last year, more games than we would like Schlegel to play. So we kind of knew that those guys, the writing was on the wall, and we were kind of happy to let them go. But Duncan was one that, yeah, we were not ready. I think a lot of us thought we'd get another year from him. I think he also, you know, we hyped him up a lot. He was killer at the beginning of the year. He didn't have like his numbers dropped off at the second half of the year. So there's a certain amount of, you know, we built him up and we love the guy, but he also did get a lot of goals for us. And we gotta replace those goals from somewhere. And like you guys talked about, it's not always easy to find someone in MLS who particularly, you can go sign someone from Europe, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to bag you a lot of goals in this league. And we kind of knew with Duncan, we're at least guaranteed like 10 or 15 from him. So I think he's our biggest loss. And having said that, it's not massive. Like we did a very good job, I think, in this offseason of retaining the players like Cartagena, like Angulo, guys that we potentially could have lost, and we managed to, you know, sign them permanently because they were just on loan last year.
Yeah, totally. I think we all remember Schlegel for his goalkeeper heroics, but not necessarily as that CB1 on the roster, right? So to have that in there, Connor, your thoughts? I want to send it over to you.
Yeah, I originally put Antonio Carlos here as the biggest loss. Just because I think when he was healthy playing for this team, he was really good. I think he was at the level where if he stayed healthy for a full season with Orlando, I think he's in the Defender of the Year conversation, at least as a finalist, maybe even as a winner. Unfortunately, I feel like his entire time he was just battling injuries. I ultimately ended up going with Duncan McGuire as the biggest loss. It's crazy to think that a year ago at this time, and hopefully I'm not exposing my lack of ball knowledge here, but I didn't even know who Duncan McGuire was. And now I'm saying he's their biggest loss in an offseason where they lost two massive players in their club's history. But I think his season last year is as great as it was and as much hype as he was getting. I still feel like it was underrated. He had 13 goals in about 1,400 minutes played last year. And he did that on 5.3 XG, which I think is insane. So he was just scoring goals that he had no business scoring. I would have loved to have seen a full season from him. I know he made a lot of appearances last year, but in terms of like minutes, 1,400 was a little bit lower than I'd like to see him hit like 2K. That would have been nice. And I know the offer was too good, like money wise, to pass up. And as you mentioned before, it sounded like he was already kind of 1 foot out the door. So at that point, you're definitely not going to stand in his way. What I am a little disappointed about is that he left to go play for a team in the championship that's like barely above the relegation zone right now. That was, I feel like, a little disappointing. I mean, I definitely think he was worthy of a move to Europe. I just thought it would be like a team in a little bit of better position. And I know Blackburn were, I think, pretty good last year, but I was a little surprised to see that. Also a little surprised to see where Blackburn got that money from, but that's a different story. I also picked Duncan because now, as we talked about before, I think the striker position is a little bit of a hole in the team right now. Not that they're in a bad spot, but I just think like that's definitely a position where they can improve now that Duncan's gone.
Yeah, I won't drag this out too long. I don't think there's really a biggest loss here. The way I usually describe that is players they've lost that haven't been replaced yet. And I obviously Duncan McGuire does feel like the obvious one in that situation, especially with the other players that they've lost, like Antonio Carlos, we've talked about, already basically replaced. And then everybody else kind of was okay to not great in terms of minutes and contributions and stuff. So McGuire does feel like the obvious one, considering that they've really only got Enrique as that true starting option. Jacqueline is a number two. So that is the one they're going to feel the most. But Connor did mention he was heavily outperforming his XG. So I think they cashed in at the right time personally, because you don't know if that's a trend that can be kept up, right? He could completely underperform XG the next year, balance out, and then the price kind of fluctuates like that. I do want to know, I guess, from the Orlando City inside point of view, who's the player to watch this year? Who's going to break out and be the next maybe Duncan McGuire, or somebody that is going to be going from unknown to, top level guy?
I think if we're going from sort of like going to see the most improvements, I think Dagger Dan is up there. I really do. I think he grew a lot last year, and I think that he can continue to grow. He's just really good on both sides of the ball. Like his defending is, has issues at times, but he's developed that a lot. He's getting better at it, and he seems to be, a very, very versatile player. Last year, I tipped Mikey Holiday to be a breakout player, and he got an injury, but there is a good chance this year that we see a real resurgence from him. So Dagger Down and Mikey Holiday kind of fighting it out for that right back role is going to be interesting. But like I said, Dagger has the ability to be elsewhere, so that's the major advantage of him. We can just move him around, and I think Oscar, we've seen from him, he's quite happy to put players in other positions that we consider like maybe they can't play there, but he seems to think they do. So I imagine we're going to see a lot of minutes from him in lots of different places across the park. But other, sort of honorable mentions, I would say Enrique is one that could have a massive year for us. He's a U22 Argentinian player, as well as Jack Lynn, like we mentioned, could break out. Like the guy scored a lot of goals in OCB. If he can make that step up, he definitely knows what the net is. And then the other one I would talk about is the guy we picked up from the draft. His name is Kuchevsky. We technically haven't signed him yet, but he's a D-mid that we've been after a couple of years from the draft. And we played him in the Flamengo game in preseason, and he got in there over Felipe. Cesar was out with U23s for Uruguay, and Kuchevsky got the start and looked really comfortable, like a guy who was just playing in college. playing against Flamengo in a 22,000 seat stadium. Was pretty impressive to see him take that jump up. So maybe we're going to see him be a breakout guy this year as well.
See, this is why we love bringing people on, not only because they have the insight, but it proves that I also know ball. John knows ball. I also know ball. My pick, Mikey Holiday. Very, very excited to see if he can step in. Always heard about him having this potential. Like he can be the next guy, the next guy, the next guy. You mentioned the injury, didn't get a chance to do it this year. And I love Kyle Smith, D3 guy after my heart. I was a D3 player myself, now a D3 assistant coach from Lexington, Kentucky, in Transy, which is where wrong side. That's where I worked. So I was at LFC for a little bit. So it was really cool to have that. Like, oh yeah, he's a local guy now playing all the way through pro. He came through Louisville and all this stuff. Love him to death. But I think it would be really cool to see Holiday step into that bigger role in 24 and do something like that. So Connor, do you have are you on the same train of thought, or do you want to prove you don't know ball?
Listen, I do know ball,
I
but
know
I am
answer.
going on a different train of thought. What's the fun if we all just pick the same player, right? Like there's enough good players on this team. We should give credit to more players. So I'm going down a little bit of a different route. I didn't go down the route of like the 21-year-old that's like fresh out of college, has a chance to kind of make like that Schulte type of impact on the team this year. I went for someone who had a really good impact last year and I think could take even further step this year in Martin Ojeda. I think all of the focus last season was on Facundo Torres and Duncan McGuire, and rightfully so. But I think Ojeda was quietly super good for Orlando last season. He had 6 goals, 10 assists in 1,750 minutes. I think that's a crazy return. And I think if he gets a full season's worth of minutes this year, and by that, I'll define that as, I'd say maybe north of 2,000 minutes. I think he could break the 20 goal contribution mark this season. And I think by doing that on a very successful Orlando team, I think that'll make him a much more well-known name across the league outside of just Orlando. So I think if he gets more consistent starting minutes this season, I think he's poised for a huge year.
Quickly on Ojeda, I agree entirely. The issue last year was, where do we play him? Facu and Ojeda are basically the same player. They're both right wingers who want to cut in on their left foot. And we had an issue with Mauricio as well. We tried at the beginning of the season, trying to play all 3 of them. Oscar couldn't figure out how to make it work. And Ojeda was the guy who got dropped to the bench. But this year, I would love to see, Nico Lodero, Facu Torres, and Martin Ojeda in that front 3. We've got Ivan Angulo. He's always a popular pick because he works a lot harder on the back of the ball. Like, he defends a lot. So he would be the guy I think that would be dropped. But if we're talking about Ojeda, Lodero, and Torres as a middle, attacking 3, I think that's really, really dangerous. And Ojeda's numbers down in Argentina were massive. So I'm hoping that he's going to have the gas theorem, and you're going to see him really step up next year.
Yeah, I get that. You probably can't swap out Facundo Torres. He's the guy that's the face of the team. So I hope you're right in that they find a way to make them work, because that front 3 is definitely really dangerous.
I haven't heard anybody bring up the Goss theory in years. I love it. Absolutely love it. That's some MLS sicko right there. I love that. But it does sound like this is going to be John's last time on the podcast. He's agreed with Connor way too much. We don't do that here.
Don't listen to him. Great. You're always invited back.
Just a couple quick segments here. Yeah, let's start with the question. If you have one question for this team, the biggest question mark that you would like to see either answered or something that you're going to watch, what is that from the Orlando City point of view?
I think it's who plays the 10, and how much that, like we just talked about, where do you fit those assets in together? That honestly is the biggest question we have. It's a great problem to have, but we've got Facu Torres, we've got Ojeda, we've got Lodero, we've got Angulo. Those are 4 guys playing in 3 positions, right? So I would argue that all 4 of them could start on any day. I think for us, it's about chance creation, and Lodero is the best at that, in my opinion. And if he's fit enough and he's able to produce, we've seen that in preseason, he was talking a lot about having the other players around him that know how to play with him. We feel like perhaps there's a South American connection we got going on there where Nico is going to be able to open up stuff for Facu and Ojeda. So for us, it's the biggest question is who plays the 10? What are the roles of these guys? And can we get them all clicking? My fear is that Oscar is going to be moving them all around. And I don't like that because it creates a bit more chaos for us and confusion and whose roles or what and who's doing what. Sometimes Facu isn't the best at being the creative number 10. He's more of just a winger. So there's a lot of questions around those players and who plays where and who has specific roles, I think is our biggest issue.
I like that. I think that's a massive part of some of the reasons why late in the season people have. I mean, I saw people questioning Pareja if he's the guy because he does a lot of tinkering and a lot of things like that. And that's actually one of my one question is the fact that he has brought Orlando tons of regular season success, not necessarily trophies or silverware, but always in the playoffs, always top half, like always getting home games. But once it gets into November, we start to see the holes, right? We start to see his inability, for lack of a better term, to get to the highest point, right? So my question is, can he get this team to be consistent in November when it matters most? Can he get them to put together the 4 to 6 game stretch that they need to take home the silverware that everybody cares about, right? So that's always going to be my thought, and then I'm sure Connor's got something just a little different.
I guess a little bit different. It's somewhat similar, I would say. I also know these are meant to be rhetorical questions, but I'm going to answer my own question too. So my question is, so Orlando's been in the playoffs for many seasons in a row now. A few times they've been in and around that Supporter Shield title. I think one season it was 5th, and then last year was obviously 2nd. My question is, how does Orlando take that final step to become Supporter Shield champions? And so I want to answer my own question here, but it's going to come off a little bit harsh, I think, because he has been like so good in MLS. But I feel like if Facundo Torres takes that final step forward and is in that MVP conversation, I think Orlando's Supporter Shield champions. So I think he's done an amazing job since stepping in, but I feel like he's been slightly below that like level that Lucia Costa and Thiago Amato were on last season, where they were putting up like almost 30 goal contributions. And I know Facundo Torres definitely has that in his bag. He could definitely hit that point, and I'm sure he will before he leaves. But I think if he did that, I think Orlando City's got to be one of the favorites for Supporter Shield.
I agree entirely. I think that we're very honest about Facu. We love him, but he's not an Almada. He's not that Carlos Gil. Like he's not Bawanga, he's not at that level. He should be that guy for us. We have him as that guy, but he's just not quite at that level. So I agree. If he could make that big step up, and we've really invested in him for that. There was questions like, is he going to leave? But he wants the Almada type move, right? Like he wants to go to a massive European club for 20 plus million. It's not going to happen with his current form and numbers. Like they're not coming to knocking right now. He needs to have a big, big year to get the sale that he wants to Europe. And we've really backed him. We've given him, the number 10 jersey. We've given him a massive new contract. I think we've kind of gone all in on him being our guy until he leaves for Europe. The question is, like you said, and I agree entirely, can he make that big next step? I also agree that Andrew said about, we sort of peter out at the end of the season. Oscar's a very good, like, sort of cup coach. So he'll get us like really good for like 8 to 10 games, but that consistency hasn't been there. At the beginning of last year, we had a horrible, like, first half of the season. We were up and down, yo-yo. We couldn't figure it out. There was no consistency, losing a lot of home games. And then the second half of the year, we were like probably the most consistent team up there with Columbus, just winning week in, week out, knocking out a lot of big teams. If we can take that second half form from last year and start the season with that same form and keep it consistent throughout the year, then I think for sure we're going to win the Supporters Shield.
Yeah, I pretty spot on there. I think you have two types of teams with that Orlando group. You've got the ones who are when they're firing on all cylinders, they're unbeatable, and then you've got the ones who will kind of ebb and flow through form, right? So the final question I've got for you, and we'll answer it too, but from your point of view, how does the season go? Where do you predict them to finish? You can do a range. You can do a single spot. We'll let you do as you please. I've got mine in a range. I think Connor does too. But you can go and be as accurate as you want. You can be as broad as you want. Where does Orlando finish in 2024?
I think between 1 and 4 in the East. I think it's the East is, as you guys I'm sure are aware, is much harder than the West. And for everything I've seen in the offseason, the East is bulking up even more. The West has some stuff going on, but really it's the East. So, and I'm talking 1 and 4 on the overall table here. Like, I think not just in the East, I think, but I also think the Eastern teams will be the top of that table as well. So it doesn't really make a difference. But yeah, I think obviously our neighbors to the South, who we don't talk about, but they are, they've got a squad. Just remains to be seen how much they can stay fit. Obviously, I think Atlanta have done big things. I think New York Red Bulls are coming back. There's some moves over in the East that are going to make things more difficult. Obviously, Cincy are up there, Columbus are up there. It's just big teams that are only getting better from last year. So it's going to be hard for us to maintain that and stay up there. But I still think our squad, and if we get the 9 in that we need and we're able to score, I think this is a complete squad, and I think this is a very dangerous team in this league. So I would keep us up there in the sort of definitely 1 through 4 in the East, if not 1 through 4 in the whole of the league.
Love it. Love the optimism. I haven't felt that much optimism in what, half a decade now. So love seeing that from other people. Connor, where do you got him?
I well, first I want to say that I fully agree that the East is an absolute bloodbath going into the season. Like Philly, Orlando, Red Bull coming back. I think New England could be good. Cincy, Atlanta, like it's just outrageous how good the East is going to be this year. But I have them in the exact same range. I got them 1 through 4. But as an Atlanta fan, I am contractually obligated to say at least one bad thing about Orlando this episode. So I think that they'll more likely be in that 2 to 4 range as opposed to the 1 to 4. I'm not sure unless they bring in that striker that's a difference maker, in which case I will have to just admit defeat. But I think the 2 through 4 is where I'll see Orlando finishing, and I do agree that I think 2 through 4 in the East is likely like 2 through 4 in the Supporter Shield.
Yeah, I think we're all relatively in the same boat here. But what I'll do, just for a little bit of spice, I've also got 1 to 4, but I think it'd likely be closer to 3, 4, and it's only because of the how thin they are at every position that isn't wide, right? Like they've got the one number 10, they've got two number 8s, and one of those number 8s can kind of float. They've got really two number 6s. The right backs are okay. The center backs they're relatively thin as well. And then goalkeeper, of course, you don't need to worry too much about that. But I think that if something were to happen, international camp, gosh forbid an injury that takes longer than a couple weeks to fix, I don't know if the next guy up in certain spots will make them like top of the top. Like that's my hesitation with them. Now again, they could be completely healthy and not have to worry about international calls and they're top of the top. But realistically, I think that there's one or two of those things that throws a spanner in the works. And I still think they're top 4. I still think they're getting home games. I still think they're running through, the other teams in the conference. But I'll go 3 to 4 to mix things up here.
I
All
agree
righty.
on the depth pieces there. I'll just say quickly that left back, we have a hole there. Like they'll throw Kyle Smith in there, but he's not left back. And and then also D mid, I agree. We just got Felipe and the guy Kacheski, I told you. But maybe Dagger Dan there as well. But totally agree. I expect us to make a few more lower end signings, a big 9, and then a few sort of fill in signings here and there. I expect.
I think we should, for the people who are going to be listening to this is going to go out on the 10th. For the people who are listening to this, this is being recorded on the 3rd. It's a Saturday. It's 12:47 p.m. If a move gets made after this date, this time, we are sorry we didn't cover it. We are sorry we didn't get into it. We cannot see the future. So we apologize. Don't come for us.
No, doesn't matter.
John,
you're still at fault.
Yeah, it's still our fault. John, thanks so much for joining us for our not so deep dive. You gave
Thank
such
you for
great
having
insight from a point of view we don't get, right, in here in New York when we're watching things. So really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it, and I wish you all the best for 2024 and all your teams you got to get through. 29. It's a lot of teams.
Ever growing list.
Yeah, we are one down. We've got 28 more to go. We've got 3 more today, and then it gets fun the next about 10 days. So, but we appreciate you being the first and reaching out to us and trying to get this going, because it was actually the conversation that we had before we even decided this kind of jump started the idea to do this. So we appreciate you. So thank you.
No problem. We're gonna have you guys come on LPO for a night and give us your insight on the league. We want to hear sort of the opposite of what we did here. We need your league-wide opinions. We've just got our Orlando opinions.
Heck yeah, we'd love to do that. Now, before we go, we always give our guests a little bit of time to say where our listeners can find you. So go ahead, take the next minute and a half, and tell them where to find you on socials and interact so they can listen to your Orlando City.
So I'm part of the Orlando Loud and Proud podcast. So you can find us at LPO Podcast on X or on Instagram. We're also on Facebook, etc. You can find me personally as John Rollins OCSC on X or Instagram. Give us a follow if you're interested in Orlando City stuff. We go live usually every Monday, and also on Thursdays often as well if there's another game. We also have a podcast for our women's team, the Orlando Pride. So if there's any NWSL fans out there, we have a podcast for that.
Absolutely. Go check them out. Make sure you give them a follow. Let them know where you came from. And we appreciate you again joining on with us. And we will see all of our listeners at our next segment, which is coming right up after this.